Okay, imagine this. A groundbreaking medical discovery, maybe even a genuine cancer cure, developed decades ago. Could something like that actually be hidden from the public? Never reaching the people who desperately needed it.
It sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But that's the extraordinary claim we're diving into today. It centers on a man named Royal Raymond Rife and what some called the cancer cure that worked way back in the 1930s.
And our main source for this deep dive is Barry Lynes' investigative book, The Cancer Cure That Worked: 50 Years of Suppression.
Exactly. And Lynes, well, he started out as a skeptic, but he apparently examined this wealth of documents held by Rife's associate, John Crane, and what he found convinced him he had to tell this story.
So our mission today is to really unpack this. It's a fascinating story, highly controversial too. We'll look at Rife's inventions, which sound pretty remarkable.
Uh-huh. And the science behind his claims, the clinical results that apparently amazed doctors back then.
And then the really dark part. The alleged 50 years of suppression that followed. So let's start with the man himself, Royal R. Rife.
Huh.
Who was this guy? Royal Raymond Rife. The sources paint him as someone who arrived in San Diego around 1913, driven by, what was it? A love for machines and a scientific curiosity.
Yeah, and what seems really unique about Rife was this combination of skills he had. He wasn't just a bacteriologist, he was also a really skilled mechanic, very meticulous.
So he could build the things he imagined needing for his research.
Precisely. That combination let him tackle disease from a totally different perspective. People said his dedication, his accuracy, his patience. It was all quite legendary. And he got this idea, maybe the bit of a startling hypothesis for the time.
Which was?
What if you could subject disease-causing organisms to, well, different electrical frequencies? What would happen? And this wasn't just a passing thought. It drove him to build his own lab, his own very sophisticated equipment, basically from scratch.
Okay, and the centerpiece of all that was his universal microscope.
Right.
This wasn't just like a slightly better microscope.
Oh, far from it. This thing was massive. 2 feet tall, weighed over 200 pounds, thousands of parts, 5,682 parts, apparently. But the size wasn't the main thing.
It was the magnification.
Well, yes and no. The visual magnification was extraordinary, 17,000 times. Compare that to maybe 2,000 times for a standard microscope. That huge difference. And the design was unique to quartz blocks and prisms for the optical path, not just air, to cut distortion. But even that wasn't the most critical innovation.
Okay, so what was the real game changer then?
It was what he called the color frequency staining method. This is where Rife's, well, genius really came through, according to the accounts. He figured out that if you tuned the frequency of the light passing through the microscope to the natural frequency of the specific microorganism you were looking at, it would resonate, it would vibrate. And that resonance made the organism light up, basically illuminate itself in its own unique color.
Wow, like hitting just the right note to make a glass vibrate.
Exactly like that. But for microbes, this beam of monochromatic light, tuned just right, was seen as maybe even more important than the raw magnification power. It let him see things nobody else could.
Okay, so he finds a way to make these tiny organisms light up using their own resonant frequencies. What's the next step from there?
Well, Rife started thinking, if these frequencies make them visible through resonance, maybe other specific frequencies could have a, let's say, a negative effect.
A negative effect.
Exactly.
Harming them.
Exactly. He called this the mortal oscillatory rate, or MOR. His hypothesis, and what he claimed to observe, was that hitting an organism with its specific MOR could make it physically disintegrate, explode, essentially.
So it's like a super targeted weapon. The source mentions ultrasonic cleaning, but this sounds much more specific.
Much more. Very delicate selectivity of waveform and frequency, as the source puts it. He claimed he literally watched these specific bacteria or viruses shatter when hit with their MOR. And this work, observing these organisms, led him to another discovery. One that was, frankly, scientific heresy at the time. He claimed he demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that bacteria are pleomorphic.
Pleomorphic. Okay, what does that mean? And why was it so radical back in the 30s?
Right. So pleomorphism basically means that bacteria aren't fixed in their form. They aren't monomorphic, meaning one shape. Instead, they can actually change their shape, their size, even their fundamental nature, depending on their environment, like the health of the host they're in.
Okay, I see why that would be radical. It completely contradicts the standard germ theory, doesn't it? The idea that one specific unchanging germ causes one specific disease.
Absolutely. That was the dogma, specific etiology, one germ, one disease. But Rife was saying, no, it's more complex. He specifically reported watching the cancer virus. He called it the BX microorganism change forms. He said it could shift from the form found in, say, an unulcerated human breast mass and morph into a fungus or a different type of bacteria like Bacillus coli, depending on the conditions.
That implies a whole different way of thinking about disease, doesn't it? Much more dynamic.
It really does. And, he wasn't totally alone in observing things like this. There were other researchers, Antoine Béchamp, Gunther Enderlein, Wilhelm Reich, who reported similar phenomena, but their work was mostly dismissed or just forgotten by the mainstream medical community.
So why the resistance? Why mainstream microbiologists have such a hard time accepting what Rife claimed to be seeing? Was it just the pleomorphism idea being too radical?
That was part of it, definitely, but there was also a methodological issue, a kind of blind spot, you could say.
How so?
Mainstream microbiology at the time relied heavily on staining specimens. You had to stain them to see them under conventional microscopes, but staining kills the organism.
Ah, so they were only looking at dead bacteria.
Exactly. Rife, with his unique microscope, was observing living, unstained organisms. He could see them moving, changing, reacting. The critics, looking at their dead, fixed slides, simply hadn't witnessed bacterial pleomorphism because, well, their methods prevented it.
They couldn't see it, so it didn't exist.
Pretty much. As one doctor who supported Rife, Dr. Edward Rosenow Sr. from the Mayo Clinic, apparently said, "Nothing happens unless an occasional person opens his mind and is willing to listen. It seems many just weren't willing, or perhaps able, to look at life in the way Rife's technology allowed."
Okay, so Rife has this potentially revolutionary microscope, this theory of pleomorphism and the idea of mortal oscillatory rates. Did he ever actually try to treat people?
He did. And this leads to what sounds like a truly remarkable period, detailed in the book A Clinical Demonstration in California, running roughly between 1934 and 1939. They were attempting, essentially, a cure for cancer using his frequency device.
A clinical trial for a cancer cure using frequencies in the 1930s. How did it work?
The treatment itself sounds incredibly simple, almost deceptively so. Patients would receive a 3-minute treatment with the frequency instrument, but only every third day.
Why not daily?
Rife apparently found that daily treatments were too much. When the targeted microorganisms were destroyed, they released toxins. Daily treatments caused these toxins to build up faster than the body could eliminate them, so patients needed those off days to recover and detoxify.
Makes sense. And the results?
Yeah.
The book mentions some pretty incredible patient stories.
They are quite striking. There's one account of an 82-year-old man. He had this gory mass of cancer on his face and neck, apparently missing an eyelid, part of his ear, just in terrible shape. After 6 months of treatment, the report says all that was left was a small black spot, and he had lovely, clean skin again, just like a baby's skin.
Wow, that's hard to even picture. Any others?
Yes, another story describes a man who was so weak he basically staggered onto a table, was a bag of bones. His stomach was described as a cavity. After treatment the very next day, the account claims he was recovered enough to drive himself home.
The next day. That sounds almost unbelievable.
It does stretch credulity reading it now. There are other accounts, too. A 9-year-old boy with osteomyelitis, a severe bone infection in his leg, requiring weekly scraping. Healed in 2 months, reportedly. Rectal cancers cleaned up completely. It paints a picture of dramatic success.
And was it only used for cancer patients?
No, apparently the technology was used for other things, too. Pulmonary tuberculosis, chronic varicose ulcers, trench mouth, pyorrhea, even a stubborn staph infection that antibiotics couldn't touch. The book states that in that first 1934 clinic, a specific group of 14 patients, initially deemed hopeless cases, were officially signed off as clinically cured within just 3 months. And this was attested to by a staff of 5 medical doctors and a pathologist.
Okay, those results, if accurate, sound absolutely world-changing. So the obvious question is, what happened? Why isn't this technology, or something derived from it, a standard treatment today?
And this is where the narrative shifts dramatically. This is where the 50 years of suppression part of the book's title comes in. The source alleges a concerted effort to bury Rife's work.
Who is supposedly involved in this suppression?
The book points fingers at several key players and institutions. Perhaps the most central figure highlighted is Dr. Morris Fishbein, who is the editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, the JAMA.
Fishbein. What's his story according to the source?
Well, the book paints a very unflattering picture. It calls him a political power addict, suggests his scientific credentials were mediocre, notes he never actually practiced medicine himself, but gained enormous power through the JAMA, particularly its advertising revenue.
Okay, so he was influential. How did he allegedly interact with Rife?
The story goes that Fishbein tried to buy into Rife's technology and company. He wanted a piece of the action, essentially. When Rife and his partners refused him, Fishbein allegedly used his power and influence to orchestrate attacks, legal attacks, professional attacks against Rife. Lynes' book makes an incredibly strong accusation, calling Fishbein the worst mass murderer in American history for suppressing this potential cure.
That's a very strong claim.
Yeah.
Were there others involved besides Fishbein?
Yes, the book names others. Thomas Rivers from the prestigious Rockefeller Institute was apparently a leading voice against pleomorphism, known for being a very forceful debater. Then there was Cornelius P. Rhodes, also connected to Rockefeller and later head of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Rhodes was a major proponent of chemotherapy, and the book alleges he effectively dictated the cancer policies of the entire country and actively prevented disclosure of the cancer microorganism Rife claimed to have found.
And the AMA itself as an organization.
The AMA's power structure is presented as a key factor. By controlling which medical schools got accredited and essentially determining licensing standards, they could pressure doctors. If you didn't conform, you risked your career. Plus, their control over advertising through their Cooperative Advertising Bureau meant they could heavily influence which treatments and products got promoted and which didn't.
It sounds like a system that could definitely make it hard for truly radical, outside-the-box ideas to gain traction.
Exactly. And beyond the AMA and these specific individuals, the book also points to the pharmaceutical industry, private foundations, even the National Cancer Institute and the FDA, suggesting their financial interests and bureaucratic hurdles, cumbersome constraints, the book calls them, made it incredibly difficult for something as radically different as Rife's approach to get approved or even seriously considered.
Did this opposition ever lead to direct confrontation? You mentioned legal attacks.
Yes, it apparently culminated in a major trial in 1939. According to the book, this was orchestrated by Fishbein, working with a former business partner of Rife's, Philip Hoyland, who had become disgruntled.
What happened in the trial?
The book alleges the trial was stacked against Rife. An AMA doctor supposedly served as the jury foreman, and the jury itself was allegedly screened. Now, interestingly, the AMA technically lost the case. The judge denied Hoyland's specific claims against Rife's company, Beamray. But the damage was done. The legal battle led to the disintegration of Beamray. It took a heavy toll on Rife personally, contributing to his increasing alcoholism, and it effectively shut down the clinical work.
So even winning the case didn't save the technology?
It seems not. And adding another layer of, well, suspicion, the source notes that just before this legal assault on Rife began, the only other significant electronic medicine research lab in the country was destroyed by a mysterious fire. Coincidence? Maybe. But it fits the narrative of suppression. It all circles back to that idea of the scientific blind spot, too, people not willing to see what didn't fit their existing framework.
It's a really troubling story, a potentially revolutionary discovery seemingly crushed. But did the ideas themselves, pleomorphism, the cancer microorganism, just disappear completely after Rife was sidelined?
Not entirely, no. It took decades, but according to the source, Rife's core findings on pleomorphism were eventually validated independently by other scientists, often quietly, without much fanfare, but the validation happened.
Really? Can you give some examples of that?
Sure. One prominent example is Dr. Virginia Livingston Wheeler. Starting in the late 1940s and continuing for years, she did extensive research. She reported isolating a specific type of mycobacterium from tumors. Crucially, she demonstrated that this organism was pleomorphic, it could change forms, and that it caused cancer, fulfilling Koch's postulates.
Koch's postulates, those are the standard criteria for proving a microbe causes a disease, right?
That's right. It's a high bar. Her view was that cancer wasn't just a localized tumor, but a generalized disease caused by an organism in the human bloodstream. That perspective, of course, implies surgery alone might not be enough. She even developed a cancer vaccine based on her findings and, somewhat famously, warned people against eating chicken and eggs, believing they could be sources of the organism.
That's significant validation. Anyone else?
Yes. In 1967, Dr. Irene Diller and Dr. Florence Seibert published a report. Dr. Seibert is quite notable. She developed the standard tuberculin skin test for TB. Their report stated they had isolated bacteria from every tumor and leukemic blood sample they studied. Dr. Seibert later read Lynes' book, called it superb, and actually urged the scientific community to re-examine Rife's original work.
Wow. And eventually, did the idea of pleomorphism itself gain wider acceptance?
It seems it started to, albeit slowly. By 1980, two French bacteriologists, Soren Senaya and Maurice Panissi, published a book called A New Bacteriology. In it, they essentially declared that bacterial pleomorphism was, in fact, a scientific reality.
Oh, so the core scientific concept eventually got vindicated, at least by some. What about Rife's actual frequency technology? Did anyone try to carry that forward after the 1939 trial and Rife's decline?
Yes, his associate, John Crane, the one who held on to Rife's documents, tried to continue the work. He developed smaller, more modern versions of the frequency instruments, devices that could apparently be attached directly to the body.
Were these ever tested or used?
According to the book, yes. In the late 1950s, a Dr. Robert Stafford conducted some initial evaluations and reported positive results. And there are testimonials included from that later era post-Rife, but using Crane's devices. One is from a doctor who claims he was cured of a severe staph infection that antibiotics couldn't beat. Another is from a woman who says she was cured of sarcoma, a type of cancer, after having had a breast removed.
But I'm guessing it wasn't smooth sailing for Crane either, given the history.
You guessed right. The suppression efforts didn't stop. Despite labs reportedly finding Crane's frequency instrument safe, the AMA, under the leadership of a Dr. Malcolm Merrill on its board in 1958, declared the device unsafe and effectively banned its use in California.
So they shut it down again. What happened to Crane?
It ended badly for him. He was eventually prosecuted, convicted, and imprisoned for, I believe, 3 years and 1 month. That effectively put an end to his efforts to keep Rife's technology alive, at least publicly. #outro Fisker.
It's really quite a story, isn't it? The whole saga of Royal Raymond Rife forces you to think about how science actually progresses, or maybe how it doesn't sometimes. It raises some really critical questions, I think, about the influence of powerful institutions.
And about what it really means to see in science. Is it just looking, or is it being open to observing things that don't fit the current paradigm?
Exactly. And it makes you, the listener, wonder about the information you get every day, doesn't it? How important is it to question what's presented as established fact?
You can't help but speculate. How might medical history look today if Rife's ideas, or even just the questions he raised, had been embraced, or at least openly investigated rather than suppressed?
It's a huge what if. But before we finish, there's an important note of caution in the source material itself, isn't there? Something we should mention regarding devices being sold today.
Yes, that's crucial. The book, even while championing Rife's original work, explicitly warns people about many of the devices currently being marketed as Rife machines.
What's the warning?
It strongly advises extreme caution. It urges anyone considering such a device to do very thorough personal investigation into the specific machine, the claims being made, the results, any verifiable testimonials. Basically, don't just jump in. The book suggests you might waste time and money, and that potentially better alternative cancer therapies might exist compared to what's often marketed under the Rife name today.
That's a really vital takeaway. It's a reminder, especially when dealing with health claims, to always be critical, do your own research, and be wary of easy answers or miracle cures. A fascinating, if troubling, story overall.